Hello, everybody. I'm here to welcome you to a festival of films presented by the AJK Mass Communication Research Center on the occasion of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. We have every day a screening from September 28th, Monday, to Friday, October 2nd, a series of films that will be shown every day. And let me give you the list. The opening film will be The Making of the Mahatma by Shyam Benegal. Then on the second day, we have Gandhi by Richard Attenborough, made in 1982. And this, as many of you know, is one of the most watched films on Gandhi across the world. Then on the third day, we have Maine Gandhi Ko Nahi Mara by Janu Barua. And on the fourth day, we have Gandhi, My Father by Firoz Abbas Khan. On the concluding day, we have two documentary films and an animation short. The documentary films, Lakshman Gole and Dhaga Mil Gaya, are made by Tangela Madhvi, two documentary films about two peoples whose lives have been transformed by the philosophy of Gandhi. And we have an animation short by Anita Balachandran called Hey Ram. But today, in order to inaugurate the festival, we have a very special person with us, Professor Ira Bhaskar of the School of Arts and Aesthetics from JNU, who has spent a lot of time thinking about both Gandhi and cinema. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Ira Bhaskar.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to be speaking on this very important occasion. It's also an honor, particularly because Gandhi has been an inspirational figure all my life. I have written on films that deal with Gandhi. I have spent a childhood listening to stories about Gandhi. My grandfather, my father, and my father-in-law, who was a true Gandhian and who used to spin cloth at home, thread at home, and then make it into cloth. And he, wore khadi all his life, and he was a true Gandhian. So I've had very inspirational figures in my life, and Gandhi has always been someone I have looked up to as a very important leader. And I'm very, very glad that you're paying homage to in one sense, one of the most important figures of independent and modern, not just independent, modern India, the man who actually brought India in many ways, brought freedom to India, and gave us the values that have made India the respected country that it is in the world today. So I'm really glad. So coming to your first question, how has cinema remembered Gandhi? Let me begin by saying that the relationship between Gandhi and cinema, the direct relationship, was not very obvious in the sense that Gandhi himself did not like films. In fact, he has a famous statement when he talks. He says that he doesn't have any time. And the only film that he actually watched was Falke's Harishchandra. And that he actually liked the Harishchandra story a lot. And he'd also watched a play. And that's the only film that he actually watched. And a lot of filmmakers, would have liked Gandhi to have supported cinema at that time. But Gandhi had no time. And one can imagine that when he arrived in India in 1915, we were in the phase of silent cinema. And from 1915 to independence and to 1948 when he passed away was really the moment of the pre-independence phase when we were making a lot of films. Sound had just arrived. Sound technology had just arrived in 1931 in India, and it generated a lot of transformations in the industry. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is there are two moments that are very important for this relationship between Gandhi and cinema. One is 1921, when a silent film called Bhakt Vidur was banned by the British government because of its likeness, because of Vidur's likeness to Gandhi. And Vidur wore a Gandhi cap, he had a spinning wheel, and there was also a song. I mean, obviously you couldn't hear it, but there were words. and the song was in praise of the spinning wheel. So obviously there was a very direct reference to Gandhi, even though Gandhi's figure was not present on screen. But clearly the spirit of Gandhi, what he represented, the values that he embodied were present in that film. And that is why the British censors were very clever and they banned this film. They banned it particularly because they knew the power of a mass medium like cinema, and they knew that the mobilization around something like Bhakt Vidur could be devastating for them. Now, Bhakt Vidur is supposedly a mythological film in the genre of mythological films. And it's also important to point out that mythological films and devotional films are films that were based on the lives of saints. Both these genres and also historicals, these three major genres of the pre-independent phase of Indian cinema are allegorical genres that used figures from the past to speak about the present. So after the banning of Bhakt Vidur, Indian filmmakers became quite clever. They decided not to have any direct references to Gandhi, and they began to actually use figures from the past, particularly in the devotional genre. So saint figures from the past like Sant Tukaram, Sant Eknath, Sant Gyaneshwar, and others, to actually articulate the values, Gandhian values, and the values that the independence movement was fighting for. And I'd like to speak about, and of course, there's a little controversy about the film on Eknath because it was called Mahatma. And this was made in 1935. And obviously, the British censors, I mean, there was nothing in it that he did not look like Gandhi at all. But at the same time, because it was called Mahatma, they were nervous. And so the film was faced a lot of troubles from the British censors, but they asked them to change the name. The name was changed to Dharmatma, and the film was released. And it is a biopic, if you like, or a life story of Sant Eknath. But Eknath is Sant Eknath or Dharmatma. He's called Dharmatma in the film. And anybody who knows, what Dharmatma means would associate it with Gandhi. Also because the film very directly picked up issues of caste prejudice and a very important fight and struggle to transform Indian society from these obscurantist beliefs in the caste system. And it has very inspiring sequences of Eknath, like Gandhi, going and eating with, the low caste Shudra families and fighting for their rights and being excommunicated and all of those from the Brahmin community. So it was directly challenging Brahminism. And that's very important. In the cinema of the 30s, the Brahmanical order was challenged directly, not in terms of the India of the times, but through the Bhakti movement. So all the saint films, except for Gyaneshwar. Gyaneshwar was a Brahmin himself, but he was also thrown out initially from the Brahmin community because they believed that he was not following true Brahmanical laws and so on. But of course, then he became this very revered saint. So the saint films use a lot of them are allegorical films about critiques of the caste system. And Sant Tukaram is particularly a film which actually so are the others, but Tukaram actually has songs and dialogues that uphold the values of dharma, of satya, and of ahimsa. These words are actually used, though there is no Gandhi figure in the film. So what I'm trying to say is that and so is Gyaneshwar, a film in which these values are being celebrated. So in the early period, there were films that especially in the devotional genre, that were actually films that were speaking to the burning issues of the day. So the caste system and critiques of the caste system was one set of issues. and the other was communalism. And a very important film in from this period is a social film. It's not a devotional. It's a social film called Palosi, in which two friends, a Hindu and a Muslim, who are very close friends, are involved in a struggle to protect their village from the rapacities of the capitalist class, if you like. And that capitalist class stands in for the British and for the rich Indian capitalist class. And of course, in order to not allow this to happen, there is a communal argument that is used to separate the two friends, the Hindu and the Muslim. And the film's burden, actually, if you like, or its drive, is to demonstrate how these ideologies are very destructive, and to bring Hindus and Muslims together, and to bring the two friends together, in even though that coming together happens in the death of these two friends, Mirza and Patil, but it brings the entire village together, and it defeats the purposes of the rich capitalist class, but brings the families together. And that is what the film celebrates. And it celebrates the idea of neighborliness, right? So what I'm trying to say actually is that in the early period, Gandhi was present in Indian cinemas, in different cinema. There are examples also in Tamil cinema and in Telugu cinema, and where, of course, in Marathi and in Hindi cinema, where the figure of Gandhi is not present, but the values that he stood for, and the values particularly of Satya, Ahimsa, and Dharma are celebrated, are upheld, and are seen as the values that are inherently Indian, and that are going to enable us to counter the propaganda and the ideology of the West. So in some ways, there was also a kind of a desire to uphold national culture identified in the terms of Gandhian ideas. So that was in the early period. And in the later period, of course, in between post-independence, there aren't films of this nature, though the question of uh, communalism and drive towards communal amity was picked up in the historicals of the 50s and the 60s, where Muslim rulers and the Mughal emperors were actually seen as as embodying the values of justice, liberty, and tolerance, very importantly, tolerance, and bringing people together. So the Gandhian message of intercommunity amity, of peaceful coexistence, these are values that these films upheld. And in the later period, of course, then there is, of course, the biopic, Attenborough's biopic that you've mentioned and that you're showing, which, of course, is a very important film, a very respectful, a very elevating film, wonderfully made cinematically. It is very powerful because of its craft. And I'm so glad you said that it's the most watched film on Gandhi, because it ought to be the most watched film on Gandhi. It is a wonderful celebration of Gandhi's life and what he represented, and of his values. So then there is Attenborough's Gandhi, and then of course there are other films as well. And then in the contemporary period, we have the Munna Bhai films and the whole concept of Gandhi Giri. And there are other films, some of which you've mentioned, that take a relook at Gandhi and try to analyze Gandhi from different aspects as a man, and the making of the Mahatma, how did he become the Mahatma, and so on. So maybe we can continue talking about this
Yes, I mean,
once.
thanks for that, Ira, because I was so inspired and and riveted when I read your essay on Sant Tukaram. And I think that what you have said is very important and educative for everybody, because you have actually talked about how you can make ideas and principles and even a person visible, even when that person himself or herself is invisible on the screen.
Yes.
because the ideas and the principles that they stood for is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
It has been always a challenge to make biographies, cinematic biographies, which for some reason is very popular in India right now. But
Yeah.
across the world, whenever a biography has been made, there's always been contention about what has been left out, what has been left in, about the interpretation. So a biography can, people expect it to be a neutral telling of whatever they have in their heads, but actually a biography is what a director feels about a person and interprets certain parts of that person's life, perhaps.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of Gandhi, it becomes even more doubly problematic because it's a person who's called a Mahatma. He's a revered figure. So I was curious to know what is your opinion about having a figure as revered as the Mahatma, and whether or not it is possible cinematically to have a robust debate about that person.
Uh, yes, it's a very difficult task to actually do that, and it also depends on for various reasons. I think the first reason is precisely what you have said, which is that you know there is a reverential attitude towards, or there used to be a reverential attitude towards Gandhi. I always love this quotation, and I'm just going to read out this little one. It's a very short one uh, from Gokhale, who said in December 1912 that Gandhi has in him the marvelous spiritual power to turn ordinary men around him into heroes and martyrs. I mean, this is actually about the impact of Gandhi on people around him. And I see that you also have two films on the last day in which you are talking actually about Gandhian figures, right?
Yes.
And he had that ability. And Attenborough's film actually has many examples, and so does The Making of the Mahatma, has many examples of how people around him were transformed because of his actions, of his beliefs, of his strength, and so on. So a debate about a figure like Gandhi is difficult because because of the reverential attitude that we have towards this leader who has almost a mythic kind of status, though in real life terms, and the films actually make him into a human being and not into some
Yeah.
godlike figure.
Yes,
Even
certainly. I mean, even a film like Gandhi, My Father,
yeah,
is a very complex look at a
yes,
complex human being and a complex human situation.
exactly. And I think both those films, Gandhi, My Father, and also Bene Gandhi Ko Nahi Mara, which actually deals with how we respond to Gandhi. It is actually about it is a film that is debating the value of Gandhi today, and whether we have forgotten Gandhi. So I think the problem that you've posed is a difficult one because of the difficulty of actually keeping a balance between what he represented publicly and what he was as a private um, man, what he was in his private life. Uh, it is difficult to balance those things, and filmmakers have attempted it and humanized Gandhi and attempted, like the films you've talked about, have attempted to show him, depict him, portray him as a human being with his. There is a moment in in Attenborough's Gandhi when Gandhi gets very angry with Kasturba because she's refusing to clean the toilets, and he gets very angry and he actually pushes her and he says, go away from here," and he's horrified at his own action. And of course he apologizes, but before that he says, "I don't know what has happened to me," and she says, "You are just human. You
Yes.
are, after all, a human being." And I think that's a very important touch in the
Yeah.
film,
Yeah.
because of course we are all human. We have our frailties, we have our weaknesses, and it is difficult even for someone like Gandhi, a figure who's so motivated that he is able to think beyond himself of the larger public good. He has his limitations too, and some of these films, the debate I'm really interested in, and the robust debate that you're talking about, the debate I'm interested in is a debate that I'd like to talk about in the context of a film like Hiram. And that is the debate about what Gandhi represented. What is Gandhiism? And what is the value of Gandhiism today? And or at any point in any at any point in history, what has been the value of what he represented in not only in the context of India, in South Africa, in America. I mean, how have people like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and so many other leaders, how have they responded to Gandhi? What have they found valuable? That is the debate I'm really interested in.
And
Um,
also, we have to acknowledge here that Gandhi is actually, I mean, he is the father of the Indian nation, but Gandhi is actually a world figure.
yes,
The inspiration of Gandhi, has spread across the world. So it
yes,
is, I mean, even if Gandhi, I mean, is less debated in India, will always continue to be debated across the world.
yes,
And
exactly,
but
exactly.
the other question, kind of, I want to tag on to this to you is that, in your opinion, do you think future generations are going to be as captivated by Gandhi as India has been?
Well, I don't know what captivated, but I really certainly hope that future generations will know about Gandhi, will read about him, will understand his ideas, will value him, and will understand why he continues to be relevant. I think the real issue here is what you posed in your question about, will Gandhi continue to be relevant, and how can we debate Gandhi? And I think the answer to that really is that we have to debate his ideas and the value of his ideas and the value of what he represents in any context. We need to
Which,
debate
which
with that.
actually is the power of the film, Maine Gandhi ko nahi mara, because the assassination is actually more allegorical. That
Yes,
how much of his ideas do we still live with, and how much of his
exactly.
ideas do we value
Actually,
in our everyday lives?
exactly. And I think that film is very important for that reason. In some ways, we haven't mourned that moment properly. We haven't mourned it properly because there is a collective guilt, which is what this figure in the film is um, is articulating, is trying to say, ki maine nahi mara, and he's responding to the idea that somehow we are somehow we are responsible, and there is an internal conflict. And that conflict, very rightly, as you have pointed out, is allegorical because it is about, do we have we forgotten Gandhi, meaning not Gandhi the figure, but his values, Gandhiism. Have we forgotten Gandhiism? There are many ways of debating with Gandhi, and Nehru and Gandhi had a debate right at the beginning. Gandhi wanted a particular way of development for India. Nehru had a vision of had a different vision of India's development, and there was a debate going on. I mean, in the public discourse, I remember from my childhood this discourse very well, very well. I also remember from my childhood, and so I often say that today, the India of today does not have the same kind of debates that I have witnessed in my childhood, right? And I remember that. I remember the texture and the tone and the quality of public life and social interaction in my locality in Patna, which is a town which is the capital of Bihar. But I remember we lived in an area which was very heavily populated with people from all religions living together, and I did not, I don't remember, any major conflicts. I actually remember a lot of amity and a lot of I don't want to use the word tolerance, but a lot of respect, and a lot of social interaction. That's what I remember from my childhood. And I think that is what, in many ways, Gandhi represents, this ability. And he fought for it. It was not easy. He struggled for it. And that is something we need to remember.
And I will ask you one last question, and that is, as you know, this festival is a short festival. We are not able to show every film that we would like to show. Uh, would you like to tell us what is your favorite film which has been made around the ideas of Gandhi? And if it is not in the festival, then whoever is listening to you will be inspired to watch that film.
Yes, actually, I have two favorite films. One, of course, is Gandhi, Attenborough's Gandhi, which you are showing, and it's a wonderful film which is celebratory, which captures the spirit of Gandhi. That spirit that Gokhale, in the quotation that I read out from Gokhale, actually is there in the film because Gandhi's figure was transformative. It was it was a transformative figure who was able to transform other people around him and transform them to be better than they are, to be, more heroic than they are, to actually tap into that which that which was powerful within them, and which was upright, and which was truthful, and really what was upright, and that had value. So I think Attenborough's film really captures that. The other film that is a real favorite of mine is Kamal Hassan's Hey Ram. And that's for a different reason. That was made in 2000. It's 20 years old. I've just recently written something about the films that are 20 years old here, and Hey Ram is one of them. And I think that the reason Hey Ram for me is very important is because it speaks to the contemporary. It's not a celebratory film. It's a film that, in many ways, is a warning to us of what we could what we could become and what we must not become. Ashish Nandi has said that, not about this film, but he said generally that the partition, the reason why we never really want to confront the partition, because if we do really confront the partition, it brings us face to face with our own contraband selves, and that few have the stomach to confront that. That's a very important statement of Nandi's, and I think this film does it. This film, Kamal Hassan's film, actually brings us squarely face to face with those aspects of ourselves that we don't really want to face. And I think that is an important exercise that we need to do to properly both mourn the horrors of the past. And I love the ending of the film, where the because the protagonist of the film was had locked himself for 50 years in a kind of expiation, in a form of expiation for what he had become and what we had all become, what all of us did not face, right? So in a form of penance, he had locked himself up and lived his life in darkness for 50 years. And his grandson, who has inherited this story, his grandfather's story, and what the national movement represented, and what Gandhi represented, because a very important character played by Shah Rukh Khan in the film says Gandhi is the only sanity in this country at that point. And the central character's grandson opens at the end of the film, opens up the windows of his grandfather's room that has a huge image of Gandhi pasted on it, opens the windows to let in light, sunlight, air, freshness. And the gesture is symbolic in many ways, because it is like saying, let us not keep Gandhi locked up in our rooms and even in our hearts. Let Gandhi be let out into the open, into the public domain, into the public realm. And that is what I think the film is saying. And that is why I like the film very much, because I think it is a reaffirmation of Gandhism, of the values of Gandhism that we really need today.
Thank you, Professor Bhaskar, for a profoundly thoughtful, uh, reflection on Gandhi's relationship to cinema. You have talked about history, you've talked about cinema, you've talked about interpretation, and you have talked about the values that we have to fight for in order to keep Gandhi alive. Thank you so much, and I hope we can have you again talking about films to us. Thank you very much, Professor Bhaskar.